Hello, I'm Helen Milner, the Chief Exec at Good Things Foundation, and welcome to Digital Futures for Good. This is a conversation series where we talk to thought leaders about how they would like the future to look and how we can get there. Today, this is episode 3, and I'm here with Emma Revie, who's the Chief Exec of Trussell Trust. She became Chief Exec in 2018. The Trussell Trust works with 1,400 food banks all over the UK, making sure that every day that people in hunger are getting the help that they need. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So if you started in 2018, you had a couple of years before the pandemic struck, but I'm sure those pandemic years really put a load of pressure onto those food banks. What was that like in the pandemic?
It was extraordinary. That I remember sitting in my bedroom with a temperature and a persistent cough mid-March 2020, and just seeing food disappearing off of supermarket shelves, a doubling in the number of people coming to the doors of food banks, real concern about how on earth we were going to keep going, and really thinking, I'm not sure our network will be able to keep going through this. But what I learned during that time is that the volunteers and the staff that make up our food banks, there's no way they were going to let that happen. And so whilst many of us were locking down and stepping back, those volunteers were stepping out and making sure that nobody was left unable to access food. And it was an extraordinary privilege to be part of that and to stand alongside those volunteers and staff. They did incredible things, and we saw a huge increase in the numbers of people coming. What I think I find most awful now, though, is that the numbers of people we saw last year needing to access emergency food are higher than the numbers of people we saw during that first year of the pandemic. So though the pandemic absolutely exacerbated and drew into the light problems that were there, they continue, and they predate the pandemic, and they continue now with too many people simply being unable to afford the essentials like food.
We found at Good Things that the pandemic has really helped to actually shine a spotlight, as you said, to make people aware that things like digital exclusion exist, that there are people in our society who don't have access or don't have the skills. And was the same true for food poverty?
Absolutely. I think we all will remember that feeling of fear in those early days. Will we be able to access food? Everyone had a taste of what it might be like to experience food insecurity. And what it did is it made people think about their neighbours, think about their communities, those people who might not be able to access food. And people stepped forward. We all looked out for each other. We changed our ways of working and living to protect one another. But we also, I think, opened our eyes to the reality that for many people, that's a daily occurrence. That feeling of fear, are you going to be able to provide food for yourself and for your family, is an ongoing and an awful fear to have to live with.
Yeah. And I think it's that, as you said about your volunteers, is that combination of real admiration of how people stepped up, and also the innovation. I know people in the National Digital Inclusion Network talk about, we weren't quite sure what we were allowed to do, but we put on our masks and we stayed three meters apart. Yeah. So that like trying to work out what they're allowed to do when they're out delivering laptops and data for people who are offline. But then compounded with these incredible stories of people in real hardship. One of our partners in the network said that one of their volunteers saw a notice in a window that just said, "Please help me." And so, of course, they knocked on the door and understood the needs of the person in there was many-fold. But just imagine being that person who just don't know where to turn and you don't know where to get help. So tell us a little bit about the food bank network. So how do they work? They're all over the UK, is that right?
Yeah, so across all 4 nations of the UK, there's 1,400 food bank centres, and they are local people, local volunteers and staff who collect donations locally from their neighbours and provide support to people in their local community who have been referred by all of the referral agencies we work with, whether that's your GP or local authorities or Citizens Advice. And people are being referred because they don't have enough money to be able to afford food. And so our food banks seek to create a really welcoming place for people to come into, a cup of tea, a listening ear, whilst another volunteer will be sorting out an emergency food parcel. And now about 80% of the food banks in our network also provide financial inclusion advice in the centres, and access to support to tackle the underlying reason why somebody is coming to food bank, which in the vast majority of cases is their income simply isn't enough to be able to afford the essentials.
And is digital exclusion something that you've picked up as a need for the people coming into the food banks?
Absolutely. We know that access to the internet now is not a nice to have. We need it to look for work. We need it to do our homework, our coursework, to apply for things online, to get better deals on our energy. And if people are unable to afford food, they're also very likely to be unable to be digitally connected. In fact, 1 in 6 people we see in our food banks have no access to the internet at all, and less than half have access via their mobile phone, and even fewer have access to the internet in their homes. So it's a real problem. And so we've been really grateful for our partnership with Vodafone and also with Tesco Mobile, where we're able to provide access to free SIM cards, so as people can have digital access, because it's so critical, not just to enabling people to access income, but also to reduce their costs. I think you'll know this far better than I, but particularly for social security, 70% of people we see in our food banks are receiving universal credit, which is our social security system. And yet 9 out of 10 people on universal credit we know are unable to afford the essentials, including access to the internet. And yet being able to access universal credit is a digital by default system. To be able to find out if you're eligible for it, to apply for it, to update the system, requires you to be able to have access to the internet. So there's a real issue, a wider issue around the sufficiency of social security, but even being able to access it is a significant problem. But we also know that people are coming to us and saying that through being able to unable to access the internet, they're also missing out on getting better deals, being able to find out information about additional support that might be available, like local crisis support. And our data shows us that people without internet access have received less crisis support. But also, and I think this is just terrible, compounding on top of the fact that people are facing financial hardship, is it compounds isolation and social exclusion. So we know that almost half of the people who access our services, who have no access to the internet, have not had contact more than once a month, in some cases not at all, with friends, family and neighbours, much higher than for people who do have access to the internet. So it's just layers of hardship that make it really difficult for people to keep going.
Absolutely, compounded hardship. You mentioned the sort of digital poverty premium there, that if you're not online, you can't shop around for deals. You definitely can't, do your online banking. There's lots of online only deals, particularly around utilities. But we also know that public services are not going to stop being digitised. So actually that, I'm a great believer that digitisation is a good thing, that it creates, better public services, efficient, flexible. I love doing my, tax on a Sunday, not having to go somewhere with a piece of paper. But we know that that's not available for everybody. So as we increase the digitisation of our public services, we need to make sure that we're not leaving people behind. And it feels very much so that working together, working in partnership around making sure we understand the intersectionality, but also making sure that people can access the services in those communities with our services.
So you coordinate the National Digital Inclusion Network, and do you think that could be used even more to make sure that people are able to access online public services?
Absolutely. So there's almost 5,000 now digital inclusion hubs. So they're all independent from us, but local, very similar, I think, in the way that your food banks work. And they provide help and support with skills, but also all the soft things around agency and confidence and trust, and also can help people with devices and with free data through the National Data Bank, Vodafone and others like VMO2 put data into that data bank, which is great. Inspired like data banks like food banks, but for data. So that they could help more people. And we would really love the government and government frontline services to understand that they exist, that they're there, that they're willing and able to take people in and to help them in a way that you or I would help. So this is not about specialist support. This is about saying, this is what the internet is. Let me help you, show you what an email is. Let's help you with connectivity. If you can't afford it, let's help you make sure that you can get devices so you can access these services. So there's so much more that can be done. And we would really love a new government to create a national network for all, to make sure that there's that underpinning safety net. So as the tens, hundreds of millions of pounds are invested in that digitisation of public services, then a percentage of that could be then invested in making sure that safety net is there to help people to come to those public services, rather than quite often that debate feels like there should be a twin track. You know, there should be a digital route and then an other route for other people. But actually, if we can bring people to the digital in a way that works for them, that is local trusted places with local people, then actually, then we could make sure that they get that support to use those improved services.
Absolutely. I think that point about people being able to afford things that we agree between us are essential is so important. So we agree that access to the internet is essential in order to be able to function in our current modern society. We also, everyone, the general public, agree that everyone should be able to afford food. We should have a safe and secure place to live. If we are unable to work, or we're unable to work more hours, if we have caring responsibilities, we should be able to afford the essentials, which is why we put in place our social security system. And yet, at the moment, what we know from our data is that social security is not covering the costs of those essentials. Over the last 5 years, in 2022, there were 3.2 million people who experienced destitution, the very deepest form of poverty. That's 2.5 times more than the number of people experiencing it in 2017. That's a huge increase in the depth and severity of poverty that people are living with. And that means that people simply aren't able to afford the essentials. Digital inclusion being one of them, food being a very important other one. This is something we need to take serious action on.
Yeah. I love hearing you say that you'd be happy if the Trussell Trust didn't exist. I think it's a really bold statement and quite easy to understand. So tell me a bit more, like, why did you say that?
Because no matter how incredible our volunteers are at creating a warm welcome, it's not right that anyone should have to rely on an emergency food parcel to feed themselves and their families. But also, it's not fit for purpose. A food parcel doesn't help you buy your kids' school shoes, doesn't put money on the meter if you need electricity. It's insufficient. So we don't think it's right that anyone should have to come to a food bank. And we know that it doesn't have to be that way. We know what is causing people to have to come to the food bank, and we know what actions we can take to end the need for them. So we would love to see a future. We believe we can see a future where no one needs a food bank to get by. And there are some key stepping stones to that. The first and most important one is around ensuring the sufficiency of social security. Yeah. That conversation we just had about the essential items, making sure that there's a guarantee for people's essentials, that the level at which we pay universal credit is set at a level that is enough to afford the essentials that we all need to live. And at the moment, there's a huge gap there. We know, we've calculated that for a single person, they need £120 a week to cover the cost of essentials. At the moment, universal credit is set at £92. But that's before deductions. And often people are sanctioned or deductions are taken off to pay historic debts or through admin errors. And a lot of people are left with actually just £70 a week to get by. And it's that gap that means people are having to choose between essentials, go without access to the internet in order to pay food and essential bills. And that, again, perpetuates a vicious cycle. We've heard from people we've spoken to that they've been sanctioned because they didn't prioritise having internet access, so couldn't update their universal credit journal because they prioritised food and paying essential bills. So we need to do something about putting in place in legislation an essentials guarantee that says going forward, the level at which we pay social security will be enough to cover those essentials. But there are other things that we also need to do. And if we did that around social security, we'd be a long way down the road to a future without the need for food banks. But we also then need to tackle ensuring that people are getting the right advice. People need advice to understand what they are eligible for, how to navigate the benefit system, how to get crisis support when they need it. So we need a national strategy to ensure that that advice is available locally from experts at the right time. We need to tackle housing. We need to be building at least 90,000 houses in England alone each year, social houses in England a year, in order to ensure that people have access to a safe, secure and affordable home. And we need to be tackling disability, access for people with disabilities to the right benefits in a dignified and timely manner. If we put these building blocks in place, it's absolutely possible to create a future where no one needs to access a food bank to get by. And what gives me great hope is that when you ask the general public, nobody thinks it's right that people are having to access food banks. Everyone thinks we should put in place these building blocks to ensure people can afford the essentials. So I'm hopeful, not only that we know what has to happen to reach that future, but that we as a society believe that's the right thing to do. We just need the leadership now to make that happen.
Absolutely. Obviously, this is Digital Futures for Good, so that I'm going to bring a bit more about technology. I know neither you nor I are technologists, which is completely fine. That, you know, you paint a picture that actually feels a bit like today's society is a bit dystopian, actually. You know, I think most people are going about their day not really understanding that level of poverty, that deep poverty that you're talking about, that they can't afford the pounds to, buy a loaf of bread, the £10 to buy a top up for a phone. These are small amounts of money for you and I, but there's millions of people in that situation. With emerging technology, that it really feels like we're at a sort of new technology revolution, like the Industrial Revolution of the past, where we are going to have a shift in the way that society works, another shift, particularly with AI, particularly with automation. And that I worry that AI is actually going to make our society poorer, because there's a lot of talk about the fears of AI around unethical use of AI, or around the inherent bias in data sets for the algorithms. But there didn't seem to be many voices actually talking about what does it mean for our society if millions and millions of people are going to be without work. And actually that if the future is in the hands of the people who are, of course, incentivized, businesses who are incentivized to make profit, then actually how will they make sure, or how will government, or how will we together make sure that we actually get the society that we want? So that I'm an optimist, I can sense that you're an optimist too, is that do you recognise that picture that I'm worried about, that we're going to sleepwalk into a society that we're not ready for?
Yeah, I do. What I recognise is that we often make decisions and choices without due consideration to the impact those decisions will have on those people on the lowest incomes in our society. That we embrace what we deem to be advances, but actually when we reflect on what that's meant for our society as a whole, we are more unequal. There are 2.5 times as many people in destitution now as were experiencing that 5 years ago. We have to be making choices for what is, and deciding what we think are the right things to do based on how they will affect people and places. Not just, so often I will hear things like, well, this new technology will enable the creation of new jobs in new industries. And that I can see is explicitly like a good thing, intrinsically a good thing. But if people are going to lose their jobs and other places are going to be less able to access support, then what are we going to do about that? We need to be making these decisions, thinking about the best interests of all of us as a society, because actually none of us want to be living in a society where people, millions of people, are experiencing destitution. That's not in any of our interests. We are a poorer, less healthy, less able to be economically strong country if we are leaving so many people to struggle against destitution. If we really want to embrace the future, where we are putting all of our best feet forward, we need to be ensuring that at the very least, we're all able to afford the essentials. And I think when we're making these kind of decisions and embracing advancement, we need to be thinking about the people who will be affected.
Absolutely.
And the kind of society we want to be.
Yeah. And obviously technology is only a tool for people to do what people want to do with it, to create the society for the people for whom we want that society to work for. I think that politicians are potentially sleepwalking into a future where we are going to have, as you said, that there will be new jobs created, but will they be for the people who are displaced, and will they be in the places where those people will be living? It's just such an important question. So think about the politicians then, we're expecting a general election at some point, maybe this year. Do you have recommendations, asks, manifestos? So what do you want from the government, the next government?
So I've covered some of them, but the main ask would be a commitment to a future without the need for food banks. Yeah. We need a vision for that. We need a plan to be put in place to make that happen. I've talked through some of those building blocks. The first ask would be to put in place an essentials guarantee that guarantees the level of social security will cover the costs of essentials. But then those other areas that I covered around access to advice, access to safe and secure housing, support for disabled people to ensure that they get decisions on their benefits in a timely manner that's person-centric. These are all things that would help us reach a future where nobody needs a food bank, because none of us will allow it. How about you? You must also have manifesto asks for the government.
That we want to fix the digital divide. So we want to have a future where there isn't a digital divide, so lots of commonality there. We see that there's a co-investment between government and business, so I think that it's very much about making sure that all sectors are working to do this, to create the society that we want. And absolutely believe that co-investment to help us through the next decade is around making sure that we do have this national network for all, the building on the National Digital Inclusion Network, so people have somewhere to go locally to be able to get the skills and support that they need and the access that they need. We also have some very practical asks, because we believe that everyone should have access to the internet, so it should be affordable. I really want the government, to the current or the next one or whatever, to role model the reuse of their technology for digital inclusion. It feels to me just such a obvious route. So we already have the National Device Bank, so we want them to be able to donate all of their devices, which we'll be able to securely clean and put them into the hands of people. We have 5 times as many people wanting and needing devices. Some of the digital inclusion hubs are saying they have waiting lists of 70 to 100 people who just don't have device and don't have that access. So it's a really critical area, but we think the government can role model that. And we believe that there should be affordable access. So that's obviously supporting the National Data Bank. It could be removing VAT on social tariffs. The idea that the poorest people in society who can afford a broadband connection still pay 20% tax doesn't seem to be ethical. Or it could be about, back to your point about sufficiency, is it that we work out who can't afford it and then make sure that they have it. So that could be, for example, with social housing providers, but just that affordability, a universality that let's get to a place where we know everybody has access, however much money they've got at any point. But I think that partnership with business, I think, is important. Because I think sometimes there's too much finger pointing, if that's the right term, where it's like, it's the market is going to solve this, or it's government is going to solve this, or civil society is going to solve it.
Yeah.
But actually, it's all of us working together. So, I mean, you mentioned that you work with Vodafone.
Yeah.
But thinking about that vision of the future where we're making the right choices, what do you think the role of business is there?
Well, we're incredibly grateful to Vodafone. They have also supported our campaign for an essentials guarantee, and I think speaking out with one voice, actually across sector, it is really important, because there's influence that business can have that it's harder for us to have as a civil society, and I think standing together is really important. Much of the work that we do as an organisation wouldn't be possible without a collaboration between business and civil society. But many of the solutions that we are looking to the future to see that people have enough money to be able to afford the essentials are around the cost of things and the level of income that people have. So there is a role for all of us as employers in terms of how we support people who are working for us, and the levels at which people are remunerated, the flexibility within their work. But then there's also something around social tariffs. I understand that just over 5% of people who are on the lowest incomes are accessing social tariffs. How do we improve that? Government have a role in promoting that. Businesses have a role in informing their customers of those social tariffs being available. There are many ways in which we can work together to support people, and we do. I think what gives me great hope is I see that collaboration between business, civil society and government in supporting the work that we do currently. What might that look like as we work together to build a society where everyone has enough money to afford the essentials and are able therefore to engage more actively in all aspects of society?
Absolutely. Do you find it difficult where some of the stats you've been sharing around people just not having enough food, such a basic need that we need food to survive. That's just shocking, isn't it? That's just shocking that we live in a country. I mean, I'm shocked that we live in a country where people literally can't access their Universal Credit Journal because they can't afford the internet, and then lose those benefits. It's just shocking. It's just shocking that we live in this society. How do you think how could we better communicate about how we need to make different choices, and what do you think the incentives are for businesses, for the government to make those different choices?
I think the incentives are huge. At the moment, if you are struggling with very deep poverty, you are focused on subsisting, on accessing food, basic essentials week to week, you're not able to step into the opportunities that there might be to engage. And all political parties at the moment are talking about opportunities for growth and for the future and engaging in the workplace. That's very, very difficult if you are struggling to make ends meet every single day. So something around tackling destitution, ensuring everyone has enough for the essentials, that just enables us as a society to step into those opportunities. I think if we don't tackle that, then we are leaving behind huge numbers, as you say, huge numbers of people who aren't able to step into those opportunities and therefore would love to be engaging in work, would love to work more. But those barriers through disability, through caring responsibilities, through struggling to make ends meet, just make it not possible. So I think we are hindering ourselves from stepping into some of those opportunities by not ensuring that there is a level under which we will not let any citizen of our country fall. And we need to start there.
Absolutely. And technology isn't all of the answer. It was great. The last episode was with Martha Lane Fox, and she said we should work together to build the modern Britain that we all want, and technology should underpin that. So, when you were talking there, I was thinking technology can help with lots of those things, with flexible working, part-time working, support for people who are carers, who are disabled to work, be that as volunteers or to be that paid work, right? That technology can absolutely underpin that if we're making the right decisions as society, let's say. Let's not just pin it on business or government, but all of us, we're all employers together, aren't we? Well, I think you definitely should be made the Prime Minister. So My final question is, imagine you were made that Prime Minister, what would you do in the first 100 days? And I'm going to be cheeky here. I'm going to make you fix the digital divide, right? So in your first 100 days, what would you be doing to help to fix the digital divide?
Well, I wouldn't have thought it will surprise you to say the first thing my government would be doing would be putting in place an essentials guarantee. And because digital connectivity, internet access is one of those essentials, by setting in legislation that there's a level at which universal credit will be set that covers those essentials, we'd be ensuring that people were able to access the internet. I think then when we look beyond that, after the first few days, I'll be looking to tackle those wider issues around people having a secure place to live. And I think with also being able to afford internet access, you'd be able to have a secure place to live with digital connectivity in your home. But also about ensuring people can access the right advice and support, which you talked about so well there, about supporting people to get an understanding of what they're eligible for, what they're entitled to just walk with people through some of the complexities of accessing support is really important. So I think that combination of sufficiency, of people being able to afford the essentials, that wraparound support, and ensuring people have secure, safe homes in which to live and flourish. So they would be the priorities for the first 100 days. How about you?
Oh, gosh. Well, as Prime Minister, I would first of all say that fixing the digital divide was something that I would put my leadership behind, make happen. As we said already, is that the incentive and the benefits to society for doing that, because just the sheer cost of leaving people behind, actually that these safety nets have to keep being put in place to support them. So leadership, priority, I would say that within 100 days I would have an action plan to fix the digital divide, and then I would convene businesses, lots of people from cross departments, lots of civil services I'm sure would have really great ideas about how it could help their policy areas, and obviously civil society to help to co-create that plan and then to co-invest in that plan. Two of those solutions, one would be building on the National Digital Inclusion Network to make sure every community where people needed it, that they could have that local support. And incredibly pragmatically, I would just absolutely get all that old tech out of the cupboards in all those government departments and put them in the hands of digitally excluded people. Because unless we actually work step by step, we're not going to fix the digital divide, we're not going to end food poverty. We absolutely need to have a vision for the country we need and a plan to get there, but also, as we both know with our day jobs, we need to just keep working day by day to make sure that we can do everything we can to help those left behind today and to work to make sure they're not left behind in the future.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's the plan. So our governments would have a plan for tackling this level of poverty, ensuring that no one has to go to a food bank and nobody is digitally excluded. And I think that plan is the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been really lovely talking to you this afternoon.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.